It was a night like any other when I got the call. A trucker's life, especially one like mine, is spent on the road. Endless stretches of asphalt, miles between gas stations, dark stretches of forest where your headlights are the only thing keeping you from complete isolation. That night, I was in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the backwoods of West Virginia. The truck was humming beneath me, the radio barely cutting through the silence, when my phone rang. "Is this James Marshall?" The voice on the other end was cold, distant. I could tell it wasn't a regular call. "Yeah, that's me. Who's this?" I asked, a chill creeping up my spine. It wasn't often I got calls this late. "This is Officer Billings from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. We've got a situation out here, and we need your help." My heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting straighter in my seat. There was a pause, long enough for me to feel the tension building on the other end. "We've got a few reports of something unusual happening around the Ridgewood area. People are saying they're seeing things. Strange figures at night moving out by the old mill. We've had 2 local guys go missing in the last week, and there's been some noise. We think someone might be out there." I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. Ridgewood. I knew the area. Desolate, forgotten by most, where the trees grow thick and the roads are winding. I had been through there a dozen times, but I had always felt like there was something off about that place. The mill? That place had been abandoned for years. "You want me to help you find someone in the dark?" "I'm just a trucker, officer," I said, my voice betraying more hesitation than I wanted. "Not quite," Billings said, his voice dropping lower. "We need someone familiar with the area to keep an eye out. If you're nearby, we'd appreciate your help. Just stay cautious. There's something going on, and we don't know what we're dealing with." I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just another case of small-town weirdness, but something in the officer's voice made me feel uneasy, like I wasn't being told the whole truth. I drove toward Ridgewood, the road stretching before me like an endless tunnel. My headlights barely pierced the darkness as I approached the old mill. The trees lining the road seemed to bend inward, like they were watching me. The hairs on my neck stood up as I slowed down, pulling over to the side. I wasn't sure what I expected to see, but I was sure it wasn't what came next. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, something darting in and out of the shadows. It was fast, too fast to be a person. I froze, gripping the wheel tighter. Then the phone rang again. "James, don't get out of the truck." Officer Billings' voice crackled through the line. "We just got a call. There's something out there, and it's not human." I was already halfway out of the truck when I heard him, but I froze. My breath caught in my chest. There was a figure standing just outside my headlights, staring directly at me. It wasn't human. My body went rigid. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The figure didn't move, just stood there in the dim light, like it was waiting for something. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of it. It was tall, too tall for a person, with limbs that seemed unnaturally long and thin. Its body was cloaked in darkness, the edges blurring into the shadows of the trees behind it. I couldn't even make out a face, just a shape that was more wrong than anything I had ever seen before. "James," I said, "don't get out of the truck." Officer Billings' voice snapped me back to reality, but it barely registered. My hands were shaking, but my feet were frozen to the ground. I could feel my heart pounding, and I realized I was holding my breath, stood there still unmoving. A sudden gust of wind rushed through the trees, and in that instant, the figure was gone. Vanished. No trace. I swallowed hard, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was here. It was right in front of me. I swear it wasn't human. I muttered into the phone, barely able to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end. "I'm sending backup," Billings said, his voice now tight, controlled. "Stay in your truck, James. Don't engage it. If it's out there, we don't know what we're dealing with yet." I wanted to argue, but my words caught in my throat. I was beyond scared. All I could do was sit there, eyes darting to every corner of the road, trying to figure out where it had gone. The wind rustled again, and I thought I saw something, movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked, nothing was there. Suddenly, There was a loud bang, like something slamming against the side of the truck. I jumped, heart racing, and instinctively slammed my hand on the horn. The noise echoed into the woods, but nothing came back except for the low growl of the wind. I dared to look out the window, and that's when I saw it. Another shadow, this time much closer. The figure was back, but this time it was moving. Slow, deliberate steps, dragging its feet across the gravel. It wasn't running. It wasn't hurrying. It was like it was savoring the fear. I fumbled for my phone again, hands slick with sweat. It's coming closer, I whispered urgently. I can't stay here, it's not a person. Stay in the truck, James. We're almost there. You've got to hold out until we... A deafening crash interrupted Billings, followed by the sound of something heavy dragging along the side of my truck. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the truck into reverse, jerking the wheel hard to get away from whatever was outside. My tires screeched, and I floored it, heart racing faster than the engine could go. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me, but there was nothing, just the dark, empty road behind me. But then the phone went dead. The call dropped. That's when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road ahead, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, the truck jerking to a stop. There it was again, that thing. But now I could see it clearly. Its long limbs, its twisted body. The darkness around it seemed to warp the air itself. And its eyes, wide, hollow, black eyes, locked onto mine. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, my breath shallow, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. And then it spoke. Run. The voice was sharp, like it had scraped its way out of the ground. But the word wasn't for me. It wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at something else. Something behind me. Before I could process what was happening, the sound of sirens erupted from the distance, growing louder. The creature turned its head, watching the flashing lights approach, and in that moment, it took one long, slow step back. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. It was all happening too fast. And then everything went silent. The silence hung heavy, thicker than the dark night air. The sirens were no longer in the distance. They were right behind me. I turned to look, half expecting to see something chasing me, but there was nothing. Just the blaring lights of the approaching police vehicles reflecting off the trees. But the creature, it didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me, its hollow eyes never leaving mine. The fear paralyzed me even more than before, and I had no idea what to do. My foot was still on the brake, but the truck felt like it had become part of the earth, stuck in place. Then, in an instant, the police cars screeched to a halt behind me, their lights flashing, cutting through the darkness like blades. Officers Billings and a few others spilled out of the vehicles, weapons drawn, but they didn't approach. They froze just like me, staring at the thing in the road. It was like they knew exactly what it was. Stay back, Billings yelled, his voice tight with something I couldn't place. Fear. Maybe. Don't engage it. But it didn't respond to Billings, to the cops, to anyone. It just watched. Then, in a move too fast for me to follow, it darted to the side of the road, vanishing into the thick woods. No sound, no trail. It was just gone. My breath rushed out in a startled gasp, but the tension didn't ease. It only seemed to get heavier, thick with dread. The officers didn't move immediately. They looked at each other, then at the darkened trees. A few muttered among themselves, but their voices were low, urgent. Billings was the first to approach me. He knocked sharply on the side of the truck, and I jumped. Get out, he said quietly, his eyes scanning the woods as if he expected something to leap out at us any moment. I hesitated, but I did what he said. My legs felt like jelly as I opened the door and stepped out of the truck, feeling exposed. The cold night air hit me, sharp and biting. Billings didn't waste time. We've been getting reports about these things for a while now, he said, leading me away from the truck and closer to the other officers, their eyes darting nervously. People think they're just stories, but we've had too many disappearances. Too many bodies found, torn apart. And then these things show up. I stared at him, barely able to understand what he was saying. "What the hell are you talking about? What are they?" He glanced over his shoulder, making sure the others weren't too far away. "We don't know, not for sure, but they're not human. They move differently. The reports say they can't be killed. Not by regular means anyway, and they don't come out unless they're hunting." My stomach twisted. "Hunting?" I asked, voice shaky. Billings nodded grimly. "You don't want to be anywhere near one of these things when it's hungry." We stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds being the crackling of radio static and the rustling of the trees in the wind. The feeling of being watched crept up again, crawling beneath my skin. I wasn't alone out here. Something was still close. One of the officers in the back yelled, "There's something in the woods, over by the trees." I turned sharply, heart slamming against my ribs. The darkness beyond the flashing lights seemed alive, shifting with something. A shape, barely visible, moving just out of the corner of my eye. It was close. Billings cursed under his breath and motioned for everyone to fall back. "Get back to the trucks, now." His voice was low but urgent. A man who had been doing this long enough to know when things were about to go south. I didn't wait for anyone else. I ran, my feet pounding on the gravel, the adrenaline pushing me faster than I should have been able to go. I could hear the other officers behind me, but their footsteps were drowned out by the distant sound of something crashing through the underbrush. I reached my truck, hands shaking as I fumbled to get back inside. The sound of twigs snapping, of something heavy moving quickly, was getting closer. I slammed the door shut just as a shape, familiar and horrifying, darted past my window, too fast for me to make out more than a shadow. I don't know how I survived that night. All I remember is the fear, the dread that something was coming for me, that it was never really gone. And then, everything went still again. I looked out through the windshield, expecting to see it again, expecting the eyes, the twisted limbs. But there was nothing. The trees swayed in the breeze, the air heavy with silence. And then, the radio crackled to life. "James, you still there?" It was Billings' voice. His words, however, didn't sound like they came from the radio. They came from something far closer than I cared to admit. I turned, slowly, my heart in my throat. The thing was in the back seat. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the world had shifted into something wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. The voice crackled again from the radio, but I couldn't focus on that. I couldn't focus on anything except the figure sitting in my back seat, motionless. It didn't move at first. It just stared. I couldn't see its eyes, not clearly, but I could feel them, like they were burning through me. I didn't dare take my eyes off it, not for a second. The radio crackled again. "James, you all right?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak. Slowly, ever so slowly, the figure in the back seat shifted. I could hear the faint rustle of its clothes, or maybe skin, moving against the leather. I tried to force my hands to move, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. My body felt like it had turned to stone. The only thing I could hear now was my own heartbeat, loud and thunderous in my ears. Then it spoke. "James." The voice was the same, deep and gravelly, like it came from the earth itself. But it wasn't the radio anymore. The voice wasn't through the static. It was in the truck with me. I could barely breathe. I could barely think. The creature's breath was shallow, almost like it was savoring the moment. I could hear it, feel it, right behind me. "James, don't scream," it whispered. "It won't do you any good." Its voice was low, raspy, and full of malice, but it wasn't human. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't see its face, not fully, but the shadows around it seemed to flicker in and out, like it was made of darkness itself. I heard a faint clicking sound from the radio again, Billings' voice now frantic. "James, what's happening? Talk to me." I didn't have time. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I might pass out from the pressure. My mind was racing, but all I could focus on was the feeling of something in the back of the truck, something waiting, watching. I had no choice. I couldn't wait for Billings. I had to act now. I grabbed the nearest object within reach, a heavy flashlight, and swung it behind me, aiming straight for the back seat. The metal of the flashlight made contact with something hard, but not in the way it should have. There was no satisfying thunk of it hitting flesh. It was like I was swinging at air. The creature hissed, a sound so low and unnatural that it sent a jolt of terror through my body. "Run," it whispered again, the voice now coming from all directions, like it was inside my head. "You can't hide from me, James. Not this time." I didn't wait to hear more. I tore my eyes away from the back seat and slammed the truck into drive, my hands shaking so badly I barely had control over the wheel. I didn't care about the direction. I just needed to get away. The engine roared to life as I sped forward, tires screeching against the gravel road, and I didn't look back. Couldn't. I just had to get out of there, away from that thing, away from the mill, away from whatever the hell was hunting me. But the thing wasn't done. It wasn't finished. I saw it in the rearview mirror too late. The shape was there again, racing alongside the truck, moving with unnatural speed. It was like it wasn't even bound to the earth, its long, gangly limbs stretching impossibly far, keeping up with me no matter how fast I drove. And then, just like that, it vanished. But not the way it had before. It didn't simply fade into the shadows. It teleported, appearing right in front of the truck. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest, but it was too late. The thing collided with the front of the truck, a massive impact that sent me crashing through the windshield. Glass exploded everywhere, the world spinning into chaos. I hit the ground hard, my body rolling with the momentum. My head slammed against the earth, and everything went black for a moment. When I woke, I was lying in the dirt, dizzy and disoriented. The truck was flipped over a few yards away, smoke billowing from the engine. The creature was nowhere to be seen. I had no idea how I survived the impact. I had no idea how I was still alive. But I was. My body was sore, battered, but the fear hadn't left. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling toward the wreckage. The forest around me was eerily silent now. No wind, no rustling leaves, no animals. Just silence. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. I felt like I was being watched, like it was still out there, waiting, and that the worst was yet to come. I didn't know how much time I had before it found me again. But one thing was for sure. I wasn't safe anymore. I'd never be safe again. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the wreckage, the world around me spinning. My mind was racing, but there was a part of me that just couldn't process what had happened. I should have been dead. I should have been torn apart. But here I was, alive, if you could even call it that. Alive but hunted. The silence pressed down on me like a weight, and the unease grew heavier with every passing second. I had to move. I had to get out of there. I stumbled toward the woods, heart pounding, my legs barely able to hold me up. But then I heard it. A rustling. Not the wind, not the trees, something else. It was too deliberate, too close. I whipped my head around, searching the shadows, but there was nothing. Nothing except the feeling. That feeling of being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up again, a chill creeping down my spine. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. Too much to ignore, but I had to keep moving. I had no choice. I pushed my way through the underbrush, branches scratching my face, my arms, my skin. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. The whole time, the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger. I could hear it now, faintly, the sound of something moving, just out of sight. Quick, almost too fast. I pushed forward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But the moment I thought I might escape, the voice came again. "James!" It was a whisper, soft, like it was right behind me. I spun around, eyes wide, heart hammering. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the dark trees and the endless stretch of the woods. "James?" I heard it again, louder this time, sharper. And it was coming from everywhere. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the voice that was inside my head, wrapping itself around my thoughts. "Run." The word didn't feel like a warning anymore. Felt like an order. I turned back, running harder now, pushing through the thick branches, ignoring the scratches and the sting of the twigs against my skin. I had to get to the road. I had to get somewhere where I wasn't completely alone, where there might be a chance of survival. But the sound of something following me was growing louder, closer. I could hear the leaves crunching, the footsteps, if you could call them that, pounding behind me. The air grew colder with each step I took, and the trees seemed to close in on me. I stumbled and fell, my face hitting the dirt with a painful thud. I pushed myself up, gasping, but the moment I rose, something grabbed my leg. It was cold, too cold, like the hand of death itself. I kicked, struggling, but whatever had hold of me was too strong, pulled me backward, dragging me through the dirt. My heart skipped a beat as panic flooded my chest. I didn't have time to fight it. I couldn't, whatever it was too strong, too fast. I looked down, and there, just inches from my leg, was a hand. Long, bony fingers wrapped around my ankle, pulling me deeper into the earth, as if the ground itself was coming alive. I screamed, twisting and kicking, trying to break free. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the air thickening with dread. And then, out of nowhere, a voice rang out. "James, get up, now." It was Billings, the sheriff. I didn't think. I just acted. My heart screamed for me to run, to get away from whatever had me, but my body was frozen. Billings had saved me before, hadn't he? Maybe he could do it again. I grabbed for anything I could reach, clawing at the dirt, pulling myself toward his voice. It was close. I could hear him. I could almost see the lights through the trees. And then, with a last burst of energy, I broke free. I tore myself away from the ground, my chest heaving, and scrambled toward the sound of Billings' voice. I ran until I saw them, Billings and the other officers, standing near the edge of the trees, weapons raised, scanning the area. "James!" Billings shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards safety. "Get in the car now." I didn't question him. I didn't need to. I ran to the patrol car and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Billings quickly followed, starting the engine and peeling away from the woods. The other officers piled into the other cars, and we sped down the road, the sound of the sirens blaring into the night. But even as we drove, I knew that it wasn't over. That thing, it wasn't done with me. It was still out there, waiting, and I wasn't safe. I wasn't safe anywhere. The road blurred beneath the tires as we sped away from the woods, the sirens wailing like a constant reminder of the nightmare I had just barely escaped. But the terror didn't let up. It lingered, thick in the air, a feeling I couldn't shake. Even as the headlights cut through the dark night, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it lurking in the rearview mirror. But there was nothing, just the empty stretch of road behind us. My heart was still pounding, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Billings didn't say a word. Neither did the other officers. They just kept their eyes on the road ahead, their faces tight, focused. We were all in this together now, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew what I had seen, what had followed me. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure I even wanted to know the answer. "Just get to the station," Billings replied, his voice calm but edged with something darker. "We need to figure out what to do next. We'll be safe there, for now." But I didn't believe him. Couldn't. The thing, whatever it was still out there. It hadn't followed us just to let us go. It had wanted us. It wanted something more. We made it to the station, the flashing lights from the cruisers cutting through the night as we parked in front. I was practically dragged out of the car by one of the officers, my legs still shaky, my mind spinning. "We'll be inside in a minute," Billings said, his voice low. "Stay close." We filed into the station, the door slamming shut behind us. The security lights flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. The air inside was cold, almost too cold for a place that should have been warm with the heat from the patrol cars outside. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The officers began setting up a perimeter, checking the windows, locking every door. Billings didn't leave my side, his hand resting on his gun holster. "We'll be safe here," he said again. But there was no conviction in his voice this time. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I was finally safe, that the thing wouldn't be able to get to me here, in the heart of the station, surrounded by officers. But as I stood there, watching the others secure the building, something caught my eye. A shadow flickered at the edge of the parking lot. I turned toward the window, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. That feeling, the one I had felt every time it was near. There was movement, a figure, a shadow that didn't belong. The officers didn't see it. They didn't look in the right direction. But I did. And then it was there. The thing. Right outside the window. His eyes locked on mine, just like before. The same black, hollow voids, pulling me in. "Get down!" I screamed, but it was too late. The glass shattered in an explosion of noise and force, a heavy weight slamming into the building as the thing launched itself toward us. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the air as the officers fired, their shots missing wide, the creature moving too fast to catch. It was inside now, pushing through the walls like they weren't even there. I scrambled for cover, heart racing, the sound of gunfire deafening, but nothing seemed to stop it. The thing was relentless, moving like a shadow, faster than any man or animal could ever be. I don't know how long it went on. Time seemed to bend in that place, the walls closing in, the air thick with panic and the scent of fear. One by one, the officers fell, each shot not doing a damn thing to slow the creature down. I could hear their screams, but I couldn't help them, couldn't even move. I was paralyzed by the terror. It was then that I realized something horrifying. It wasn't just hunting us. It was feeding off our fear. That's how it moved. That's how it found us. It fed off the terror. And it wasn't done with me. I ran, slamming through the back door of the station, desperate for any kind of escape. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest, but I couldn't stop. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see it again. But this time, it was different. The thing wasn't chasing me anymore. It was in front of me, its twisted form towering in the alley, blocking my only way out. Couldn't breathe, couldn't run. It was the end. But then, something strange happened. The creature didn't move. It didn't come closer. It simply stared, those hollow eyes boring into mine. For the first time, I saw something in those eyes. It wasn't just hunger. It wasn't just malice. It was something else, something I couldn't understand. And then, it spoke again, its voice cutting through the air like ice. Not yet, it whispered. Before I could make sense of what it meant, it disappeared, just vanished into the darkness. The silence was deafening, and I knew in that moment that I had survived. But I didn't win. I knew the creature was still out there, and that it would never stop. I don't know how long I can live with that, knowing it's watching, knowing it's waiting. The only thing I know for sure is this: there is no escape. It's never over.